I'm starting with the only story that matters this week.
What's that?
The Eurozone.
Yes. Let's talk about Greek austerity. No. Let's talk about the Nintendo PlayStation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a almost thing.
What? Well, yes, you're right. In a broad business sense, you're right. It was almost a thing.
But there was physical things that were made.
In a literal physical sense, it got made and one has been unearthed. Drew, you seem
perplexed.
A little history lesson.
I've never seen you this confused.
So before Sony got into the PlayStation business proper, got into the video game business on its own, it did a deal with Nintendo.
They were like, hey, we can make you a disc-based.
To do a CD-ROM-based add-on for the Super Nintendo, not unlike the Sega CD.
It was basically, yes.
I've heard this legend.
Yes, and they were to call it the PlayStation.
And
the Nintendo PlayStation?
Well, no, it would have been. It was the Sony PlayStation Super Disc.
All right, so I was not even aware of these plans, but yeah, so Jeff was saying this morning, like, I guess there were plans for both an add-on.
Yeah, it could have existed in two forms. There would have been Sony's hardware that would have been a combo unit, sort of like the JVC XI is for on the Genesis.
Basically, just a Super NES and CD-ROM in one package.
One thing.
Yeah,
that Sony would produce and would bear kind of these PlayStation branding things, and then there would be an add-on unit produced that would connect to existing Super Famicoms. And be sold.
Sure enough,
Nintendo.
Sure enough, it had that feature connector on the bottom of it.
Yeah, that they used for the Satellaview, which got things from a satellite.
Sure.
To play satellite video games.
If I remember correctly, like way before the PlayStation itself happened, like when all this deal stuff was going on, like magazines and stuff were reporting on it, right? Like it was known about.
Yeah, because it's like Sega had kind of played its hand. The TurboGrafx, the PC Engine was out there with similar technology. It was the sort of thing you looked at and said, like, well, naturally they've got this connector on the bottom. Like, this is where everyone's going. They'll have to do this.
So just kind of in the context of history, this isn't something where years later everybody heard about this deal that fell through and they're like, oh, that would have been crazy if that had happened. Like, people were expecting it at the time to come out.
Yeah, you would start to see, like, artist rendition of this such and such thing. Then everything got a little muddy around the time because, like, what had happened is, like, they were doing a deal with Sony. They ended up doing a deal with Philips that also didn't produce anything. And then that deal with Philips is what then allowed Philips, who went on to produce the CDI, to then use some of Nintendo's characters in those fucking awful CDI games.
Oh, right. Yes, like Link stuff.
Yeah, the Wand of Gamelon and the Hands of Fate or whatever it is, that fucking Hotel Mario. Like there were some real fucked up things. Yeah, so I guess what is it? I guess the story is, I think I have this in the right order, that relations between Nintendo and Sony soured, so Nintendo went to Philips. And then that ended up not making any sense either, because at that point they're probably too late in the SNES cycle for them to even produce anything in a timely fashion.
Kind of probably just a historical curiosity at this point, but Sony and Philips were the two companies that had invented the CD.
Yeah.
The compact disc, like they were the two companies, so you can kind of see why Nintendo would be like, let's go with one or the other that made this thing.
Yeah, I guess I take it for granted now that the Sony PlayStation is a thing, but like back then, Sony and Philips were kind of direct competitors, and it could very easily have been like when both of them got shut out from Nintendo, Philips made their CDI and Sony made their PlayStation.
Right.
Yeah.
There's no reason to think that we could be talking about the Philips CDI.
Right.
Now.
Like it was like, thinking back to that era, like it was really weird to think about Sony making a video game console, because they were the people that made VCRs
as weird as Microsoft making one.
Yeah, totally. Like it was like, no, they make the Walkman, they don't make video games.
Right. And it was at the time, like, so this was when multimedia was happening. This is when Myst was the biggest game in the world, and
Encarta.
Encarta was the biggest game in the world. And you had the 3DO. You had like these expensive CD-based systems like the CDI getting out there. The CD-TV, which was like an Amiga just consoleized. And the CD32, which was also another version of that, kind of. And so, like, it made sense in a way when you started. Like, so I started hearing, like, hey, Sony is getting into the video game business, like, for real. I was working at a magazine at the time, and someone who worked there was like, hey, so Sony's getting in with something. Do you want to meet with them? Like, maybe we could figure something out. Like, they aren't meeting with press. Like, they're not quite sure what they're doing yet, but they're doing something. Like, I could probably hook you up with the guy over there who's like their game guy. And I was like, absolutely. But then we all got laid off and the magazine shut down before any of that stuff got set up.
Damn it.
But at the time, like, you heard about that, and I was like, Yeah, I guess, man. The fucking 3DO is a shit show. Philips is making garbage over here. Like, it's, you know, like, all this shit sucks. Like, the idea of Sony making a console, you're like, that's going to be fucking trash.
Yeah. Because you figured it would basically be a VCR. Or, you know, like that quality of product.
You figured it would be really good at playing, like, the CD-based systems of the era were pumping out shit.
Yeah, nobody had done good video games on CDs at the time.
Well, I mean, they were different types of games.
Well,
you know, they were more FMV based. They were more kind of multimedia. It was like, you know, here's a shitty point and click adventure game that has these kind of video transitions from thing to the next. Like, I felt about Myst the way some of these assholes feel about Gone Home now. Is that Myst was so super popular and such a fucked up thing that I could look at it and go like, that's if that's the direction the video games are going in, like, that's fucked because these games are bad. And it ended up being fine, as it will this time as well. But at the time, you look at it and go like, man, this is all these things are shit. Why are all these, you know, you saw it as non-video game companies encroaching on video game territory with garbage. You're like, okay, well, that's not.
We could do that.
Yeah.
I got a handy cam.
Yeah, totally. And so there was no reason to believe that Sony would have anything that was worth the fuck at all.
Copy of Bryce.
Yeah.
Also, my impression was always that, like, there was a fair amount of peak on Sony's part when that whole thing fell through, and that was kind of why they threw as much muscle behind their effort as they did, right?
They had been making software, like Sony ImageSoft existed prior to that. Like they had been making games for a little bit.
And it was just like this thing fell apart because Nintendo pulled the plug, right?
I think
they did, and I don't think
they
let Sony know.
Yeah, right. So I feel like I remember reading that like people at Sony were very displeased about that, and they were like, "Well, fuck you, we'll do it ourselves then."
Yeah, exactly. That is my understanding of it as well, and so it kind of led to them developing the PlayStation.
Yes.
And you know, making very different choices than Sega was making with the Saturn at the time, but you know, like making a system that was competitive in that race and that didn't fall into that kind of broader multimedia category. Like, you weren't looking at, like, I have a CD TV disc that is, you'd love it. It's awesome. It's called Advanced Military Systems.
Great.
It's just a fucking encyclopedia where it's like stock music and a guy talking to you about fucking missile systems on aircraft carriers. It's the coolest shit in the world.
M1 Abrams.
Totally. It is.
Top speed of 60 miles an hour.
It is exactly that. You know, and it was stuff like that. You're just like half-assed like visual encyclopedias, and then games that weren't much better than the visual encyclopedias. Yeah. And then occasionally you get something that resembled a real game, like a platformer or something like that. But then you realize like, oh, this controller is terrible.
Yeah.
Like in the
Why
3DO,
don't you hold it upside down? I
right?
don't understand.
Yeah. The 3DO falls into that camp too.
But you know, like to Sony's credit and like Ken Kudaragi's credit, they rightly saw that the future of video games was 3D graphics. It wasn't CD-ROM. You know, it's like they had a CD-ROM because you had to at the time.
Yeah,
but like
they were storage, but
they were forward thinking enough. Like the whole story about the Saturn is they built it around 2D, and then when they realized what they were up against, they were like, oh fuck, what are we going to do? And they like doubled the CPUs in there or whatever. But that didn't help. Very much.
Yeah.
Whereas,
still
like,
lag behind.
Like, you know, I remember the first time I walked into a Circuit City and saw that T-Rex demo running on, like, the demo PlayStation unit there, and I was just like, holy fuck, this is the future.
It was the you know, whatever the E3 it was, or whatever the CES it was, that, like, the PlayStation was out in Japan, or just about out in Japan, and then, like, Sega was showing the Saturn real big, but then there was some third-party controller manufacturer that had a fucking PlayStation off to the side. And we just sat there and played Toshinden for 3 days straight.
And it's crazy looking back.
The coolest game in the world.
Right. And like looking back, like the PS1 has not aged super well visually.
No.
But at the time, like it was just like you fucking couldn't believe what you were seeing on a TV.
Yeah, the idea that it was a console that was coming out, and you looked at it and then looked at the stuff on the Saturn, and you were just like, man, the Saturn, like even right then and there, before any of it was in stores, or maybe that was that might have been the year the Saturn hit stores. I don't know. It's all hazy. The years get hazy for me. Sorry. But you definitely looked at that shit and said, fucking Sega is fucked.
They're done.
Like, none of this shit's even out in this country yet, and they are fucked.
Yeah.
Which made it really interesting. And it's where, I mean, we talked about it a bit last week, but it's where the Sega fans got fucking rough. You know, once the Saturn came out and you were like, okay, these games are not as good. Like, technically, the 2D stuff is better, and that's great. I like fighting games too. But let's not kid ourselves. And you had these people that were living in this alternate world where they were like, no, fuck you, the Saturn is the system.
Jeff, let me tell you something about a game called Knights.
Yeah. Exactly. That is a perfect example. Like people that would fucking go to bat for fucking Knights. Yeah.
That controller was pretty good. As the first, like, analog...
No, as for what it was, the controller was not the problem with Knights.
I know.
All of this is to say that as much as we thought that Nintendo Sony thing was just like kind of an artifact of history, somebody found one.
What?
A Nintendo PlayStation has been discovered.
Yeah. One of the rooms off to the side of Tutankhamun's tomb?
Basically. Like, basically was found in the guy's attic, more or less.
Wow.
Tutankhamun's attic?
Hang on, I pull up the guy's name here real fast. Dan Diebold, or Diebold, is the guy who found it. But it was actually his father, Terry, who was in possession of it.
Ooh, these names sound super familiar.
Yeah?
Yeah. Keep talking.
Well,
wait.
To make a very long story short, Terry Diebold had worked as a maintenance guy at a company that... Sorry, I'm trying to parse the history here. He worked as a maintenance guy at a company, the president of which used to be the CEO of Sony Interactive Entertainment way back when.
Olaf
Olafsson.
Yeah, that's a great name.
Yeah. It is, absolutely. He's also a physicist and best-selling novelist.
Yeah.
In addition to those other things. But yeah, that was like... Sony Interactive Entertainment was like the precursor to Sony Computer Entertainment.
Yeah, that's how I understand it.
So he would have been around when all that prototyping and Nintendo stuff was going on.
Yeah.
And best as I can tell, a bunch of junk made it from SIE over to this new company that Olaf Olafsson founded or was working
that he
at.
left there.
Yeah. And then when that company went bankrupt in 2009, Terry Diebold was told to clean out a bunch of stuff and throw a bunch of things away, and found a box in like the basement or storage area of this company that had this thing in it.
Yeah.
And just decided to grab it instead of throwing it out. And then his son found it and posted a photo on Reddit over the weekend, and everybody lost their mind.
Wow, I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah. Isn't it crazy?
He's posted some video of it since that makes it seem like it is legit.
Yeah,
I mean,
it seems...
If it's fake, it's super elaborate.
It's a really good fake. Yeah, that controller, which is literally just a Super Famicom controller, but it has a PlayStation logo on it, is so crazy. Like, it blows my mind that they got to the point of having the logo designed and everything.
Well, it's not quite the exact font.
Yeah, there are some differences, but they were close. Like,
yeah.
It's not like, it's not like Prototype 001 or something. It's like, here's the more or less a PlayStation logo.
Yeah. It's white plastic like the Super NES, and it has yellowed in just the same way.
Best part.
And it says Sony PlayStation on it.
Yep.
This is wild.
Yeah, it's insane. He does not have a power adapter for it, but he says he's looking into getting one. Although that scares me. He basically just says like, I'm going to go try to buy a power adapter.
Nah, man,
like,
you need to talk to like an electrical engineer and
Yes.
say like, I don't want to blow this thing up.
Like, do not try to power that thing on without Steve Lynn present, please.
What do you think this thing is worth?
I mean, it's a one of a kind. Like the numbers of these were probably destroyed.
Yeah, the story I was reading said that they had 200 prototypes produced and that Sony ordered them all destroyed.
So presumably some of them survived.
Yeah, this may not be the only one in the world, but it's probably close.
Yeah,
$100,000
more than that.
Oh,
probably. Yeah, because I mean,
so bad.
Rare cartridges go for tens of thousands.
yeah,
Right.
So, he's got one cartridge and one CD that were with it.
Fuck.
And he doesn't know what are on them, obviously, because he hasn't booted the thing up yet. There could be like test software for that CD-ROM
his house
on
needs
there.
to become the end of E.T. Like Steve Lynn in a radiation suit needs to come in there with an electrical engineer and one of those like the tanks with the gloves that are hermetically sealed.
Yes. Yep. Take it into a clean room.
Dustin Hoffman.
Yeah. It's a crazy find. Like, whoever thought that they would see one of these things?
Yeah,
Nobody.
Yeah,
There's something like almost mythological to me about consoles that never came out.
Yeah, definitely.
Like
the
M2, the 3DO successor has always been the thing to me. It was like that thing almost came to market, but not quite. Mm-hmm. Like they made it, but it never got sold.
There was and
people have those. Like Steve has an M2.
Yeah, the M2 dev kits got out there, and just like this is technically a dev kit. I would say,
right.
In some form,
just way more rare and more legendary.
Yeah, and there's other stuff out there like that.
Did the Phantom ever come out?
No, like the machine didn't. Like the Lapboard did.
Yeah,
but the Phantom was just kind of a PC anyway.
Right.
Like it technically wasn't anything on its own, but
I think for me the thing layered on top of everything else about this is just the sort of the baller status of these two companies,
No joke,
like
yeah.
two of the biggest names in the history of video games. They got together and almost made a thing, and it actually exists.
I've seen so many different like prototype mock-ups of that,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
actual illustrations of what this is going to be like, and to find out that it actually exists.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew that there had to be something, but I assumed it was just going to be like in a big black box,
Right.
That was
Not
nothing
like
to look
something,
at.
not something that looks more or less like what they would have sold.
Yeah. I mean, there's other stuff out there that never came out. The Conix multi-system. That's what I was thinking of. It was a British-produced console
Okay.
that I think was supposed to be around the PS1 era.
Oh wow!
That got some coverage but never came out.
Nothing that so encapsulates,
Yeah.
or that is so pivotal in the modern,
right.
or the history of video
Like
games.
if that deal had gone
as
through,
a physical object
yeah.
like this.
Like if that thing had come out, like who could say what the game landscape would look like these days?
Exactly. If Nintendo had embraced CD technology early on,
Yeah.
and it had been successful enough that they built it into their future consoles, like you would have had, like Final Fantasy VII would have existed on a Nintendo
that would have-
console.
Final Fantasy would have remained a Nintendo franchise,
Right.
Like,
Would it
and
have been 3D though?
I mean, that
probably
was
because that's what Square wanted to do.
Yeah.
Like they remember Square was doing tests on like SGI derived like N64 stuff before they moved over to the PlayStation.
That's
Like,
true.
They clearly wanted to go in that direction, but not only that, but Nintendo would have been working with like Kutaragi and those other minds at Sony that made the PlayStation happen.
right.
Like it could have just remained a Nintendo versus Sega thing if Sony had liked that partnership and kept going with it.
Yeah, and then like the Sony's success had to at least have played a role in Microsoft getting in, like looking at it, going like, well,
if those guys could do
someone has entered this space recently enough that we feel we can make a dent too. And it's not to say that they would have never gotten in if Sony hadn't. It's not overstate things, but like certainly all of these things would play some kind of role.
Yeah. It's definitely one of those like
It's you could not predict it.
Yeah.
You could not predict what video games would look like if this stuff had come to pass.
yeah, totally. So yeah, that's why this thing is so exciting. And I hope they successfully manage to turn it on at some point.
Yeah, I would love to just see the boot up sequence. Like, what the fuck's that thing look like? What does it do?
Yeah. God, I hope there's something on there, something that looks like a video game. Just see what that thing was
If
capable
it's
of.
that far along, like design wise,
Because like the Sega CD bolted extra computing stuff onto the Genesis.
Yeah.
It had scaling and rotation and stuff.
Right.
It wasn't just a CD-ROM; it made it a more powerful system. So, if they had done something similar to the Super NES, like who knows what that thing could have done?
Mode 8 graphics.
Yeah, Mode 8,
man.
Oh,
Yeah, it's crazy to think about that thing showing up.
It's really cool. There's not a lot else to say. Like, he says he's, like I said, he's going to try to get some power for it. He's got like a friend in somewhere that's got a retro game shop. He's going to get to look at it. He said something about his dad selling it.
Yeah.
Who knows where this thing is going to go or what they're going to do
I
with it.
suspect that if he should actually not do anything with that shit and just sell it
Think so.
to someone who could
yeah,
then
seriously.
do it.
Can appreciate it and take care of it.
Send that thing in, get it graded.
Right, yeah. Get that CD encased in plastic. Yeah. It's
He just takes it to Vegas.
just sets it on black.
Yeah.
It's cool. It's super cool.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to see something else hopefully come out of that.
Yeah. It'd be nice to know like who had those kits, like who was working with it, like had it gone out to any third parties
Yeah.
in a meaningful way.
Like you would assume those are the ones that probably got
Yeah,
returned.
'cause you would think, yeah, totally. But you would think that like the software end of that stuff would have, like, people would talk about it a little more freely now. Like,
Yeah.
well, this was in development here, and this
Yeah.
is what it looked like, and obviously it never came to pass. But here's, you would think some footage of a game or something like that.
We're definitely getting to the point where that stuff has been long enough ago, that era of games, that people feel a lot more at liberty to, like, did I tell you about that story Grant Kirkhope told on his Twitter about Diddy Kong Racing being an RC Pro-Am game?
Yeah,
Like, you can go find his tweets. This was only a week or two ago. But
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
he went into very specific detail about they were doing, what was it? I think they were doing Banjo-Kazooie at the time. And it was like, it was a big thing for Nintendo. And they showed it at E3, and they had met with Howard Lincoln, who said this game fucking has to come out by Christmas. And they knew there was absolutely no way that was going to happen.
yeah.
So this RC Pro-Am game that was being worked on got a bunch of Donkey Kong stuff slapped into it.
Like existing assets.
Yes.
It's like we could finish it
Well,
faster.
well,
if we
I
wanted to make this.
I don't know where the models and stuff came from,
Yeah,
but they
yeah.
basically turned an RC Pro-Am game into Diddy Kong Racing, so they would have that game for holiday because Banjo was not going to make it.
Because Banjo. Okay,
Like they basically did that to get a sort of franchised like character game out for the holiday because they didn't have Banjo. Like you can, he obviously goes into more detail on his Twitter if you go back and find those tweets, but it's awesome that
Grant
people.
Kirkhope tweet of the week.
It's just whatever. There's books, there's books about the console wars and stuff from that era also out at this point. Like
Movies on the way.
people are really
Yeah, they're making 2 movies about that console war book.
wow, really.
Yeah, one a documentary, one a fictionalized. Like,
Who's going to play Tom Kalinske?
Tom Kalinske will.
Yeah. Oh, that'd be the best. Yeah, it's super cool to see stories and hardware and all kinds of shit coming out of that era
Yeah.
because that was kind of when everything changed.
Yeah, definitely.
On to somewhat more pedestrian news. Minecraft Windows 10 Edition.